Today I'm going to show you guys over 10 different ways to reduce the overall CPU power needed to process an audio project in your DAW.
True Sound Studios is in your ears.
Hey guys, what is up? I'm Wiesna, and as always we're here in my studio, True Sound Studios. So today I'm going to share with you guys all the different things that I still do and used to do when I didn't have a super powerful computer to run my audio projects. Now some of these things are just good things to do, just good habits to get into to make sure that you're always taking care of your computer, just to make sure you get the most amount of performance out of it, especially when you're running these really CPU demanding audio projects. Okay, so let's get in this video and let me show you guys how to free up some CPU power on your computer. Okay guys, so one of the first things you can do to save on CPU power is, for example, right here we have 3 vocal tracks. Each one of these vocal tracks is running the console emulator on each one of the vocal tracks. So right now I have 3 instances of the console emulator running one on each of the vocal tracks. So if you're like me and you end up with about 10 or 20 vocal tracks on every single project, that is a lot of console emulation to run and eat up CPU power. So something you can do to change this is go ahead and create a new stereo bus. So we're going to go ahead and call this one Vox Bus. So what you can do is now disengage all the console emulation on each one of those vocal tracks. But now what we're going to do is on the output down here, we want to go ahead and route this to Vox Bus. So now what's going to happen is all of the outputs of each one of our vocal tracks is now going to run over to the Vox Bus and then eventually to the master output. So now what we can go ahead and do is on our Vox Bus, we can go ahead and add the console emulation. And now instead of having 3 instances of the console emulator, now we only have 1, and all of our vocals, and you could have 10, 20, 50 tracks of vocals, but now they're all going to get this console emulation sound, but now we've only have 1 instance of it, which will definitely help on the CPU power. Now this is not just for the console emulator, you can use this for the tape machine, a certain EQ setting or compression setting or whatever it is. This is just a really great way to cut down on plugins so that you have more CPU power. Okay, so the second thing you can do to save on CPU power is use the freeze button. So right here, this is our main vocal track. If we go ahead and click this freeze button, what is going to happen is this audio file is now going to permanently be processed by our vocal writer, our compressor, and our EQ. So unfortunately, you can't go ahead and edit these plugins unless you unfreeze the track, edit the plugin, and then refreeze it. So, besides that little inconvenience of constantly having to refreeze, this is really a great way to cut down on CPU power because now this track doesn't have to process all 3 of these plugins every time this audio file is being played. So the third thing you can do, and it's kind of related to this freeze button, so what you can do is actually just create a new track and go ahead and select that file that was froze, hold down the shift key on your keyboard and drag it up, and what you've done is you've now taken that frozen track with all the plugins on it and you've made a new track, and now you could go ahead and edit and add more plugins to this track. The only problem is you can no longer edit the original plugins that were now made part of this track. So no longer could you edit the vocal rider, the compressor, or the EQ. But if you're confident in making decisions on EQ and compression settings, this is a great way to cut down on processing power, because now essentially this vocal track is going to process no plugins when it's played. Okay, so the fourth thing you can do is you can actually take an audio plugin and actually put it on an audio file. And this way, instead of having to create an extra track for maybe vocal effects or something, you can keep it all on one track and just minimize the amount of plugins that you're going to use. So for example, right here,
Yes, sir. Yeah.
let's say in the very beginning, we just wanted that to be a little bit more of an effect when he says the the intro. What we can do is just click on the audio file and then right click, and we can go ahead and insert an effect. So for this, maybe we'll just pick an EQ. This is a mono file, so I want to make sure I pick a mono EQ. And maybe we'll go ahead and, just kind of make that like telephone effect type thing. Maybe we'll cut off some of the high end. And now let's take a listen.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Maybe a little too much.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, so now what I've done is I've taken this EQ, and this EQ is only on just this little section of audio and not the rest of the vocal track. So if you wanted to edit this further, you could click on it. There's the plugin. And what's great is now that you've just decided that, this is the vocal sound you want, you can go ahead and click on this and then do right click and bounce the clips. And now this EQ is permanently on this small section of audio, and no longer will the computer have to process that EQ change every time it's played.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
So the fifth thing you can do is go ahead and mix down multiple different audio files into a single track, maybe a stereo track or a mono track, just to reduce the amount of processing power that is needed to process, a whole group of tracks. For example, here I have a kick drum. So this is part of a actual kick drum, like on an acoustic drum kit. And it was mic'd with two microphones. There's a microphone inside of the kick drum, and there's a microphone on the outside of the kick drum. So if we play these both together, you hear we got our kick drum sound. So if I go ahead and solo, this is just the low. And then this is the kick in mic. So between these two, maybe you've gone further into mixing this kick drum. You've added compression, and now you're up to 6-8 plugins between these two different kick drum elements. So what you can do is, if you've decided on what is a good kick drum sound, let's say you like this mix right here, and that is going to be the permanent sound for your kick drum, what you can go ahead and do is once again create another audio track, and we're going to take both of these files and we're going to select both of them, and we're going to come up here to tracks and go to bounce to tracks, and we're going to select that track number 4 right there, and then over here to channel format, because that top mic was in stereo, it had a stereo effect on it slightly from the overheads. I'm going to go to stereo, and then right down here in fast bounce, I'm going to do it fast bounce right now just so it happens quicker, but you might want to uncheck that because I feel that it does affect the quality. So go ahead and click OK. So now, as you can see here, it's taken both of these audio tracks and all the processing and just created a stereo kick drum track that has all the processing on here. So no longer when this is played is all those plugins going to have to run and process the audio. So if we play just this top one, that is the audio track mixed down with both of the kick drum sounds and the plugins. And then this was it before we mix it down. And then back to the mix down. As you can see, we have an exact clone, but now because we're not running 2 separate channels and all these extra plugins, you're going to definitely save on CPU power. Now, you don't have to do this just for drums. You could do this on guitar tracks if you maybe have multiple mics, or bass guitar if you had a DI or a microphone. Now, you do just want to make sure of phase. You want to check your phase before you go ahead and mix this down, because after it's mixed down, you won't have really the opportunity to go ahead and correct things like that. Okay, so the 6th thing you can do to save on CPU power is when you are recording something in stereo. I, for my overheads, used to make 2 tracks. I had overhead left, which was 1 track, and overhead right, which is another track. Now, for the most part, I did the same processing on the left track and the right track. So you can see I have the CLA drum here on this one and an EQ on this one. Now, if I do that for the left and right, I have a total of 4 plugins. So obviously 4 plugins is a decent amount of processing for the computer to handle. But if I'm just going to go ahead and pan my overhead left all the way to the left and the overhead right all the way to the right, why don't I just go ahead and make 1 track out of it, a stereo track? So the benefit of this is you can go ahead and select stereo plugins that are going to process both the left and right in stereo, but now you've reduced the amount of plugins you have. So for example, if I've recorded my left and right on my overhead stereo, I now only need to run 2 plugins versus the 4 plugins up here to essentially get the exact same sound that I had. So number 7 is to track with either a compressor or an EQ. Now, why would you do this and how does this free up CPU power? Is because if you track with a compressor, chances are you're not gonna have to compress so much inside of your DAW. Now me, for example, I might run 2, 3, 4, 5 different compressors depending on what I'm trying to process, because I like to do it all on like smaller stages. Every compressor has its own sound. Now, tracking with a compressor, meaning the compressor is in between the microphone and the interface, means you get to have some more control over what you're recording. Now, the bad part about that is you know, if you overcompress, you can't go back and fix it. If you undercompress it, you know, you're really probably not doing too much, but this is a really great way to cut down on the potential amount of compression or compressors that you might have to use on, you know, a vocal or a drum or a guitar or a bass or whatever it is. Now, I do have a video out that shows how to use an analog compressor while tracking vocals, and I'll include a link to that in the description of this video. Another thing that I love to do is to track with an EQ, so, you know, pretty much take out a lot of the garbage junk noise. Maybe something as simple as, you know, reducing a little brightness or cutting some of the low, you know, thuddy low end that I might not need, but I might have to do when it gets to the mixing process, and doing something as, you know, as simple as EQing during the tracking process means one less plugin that I don't have to run in my DAW. Okay, so the 8th thing you can do is if you know your computer, let's say, you know, you can only run about 30 plugins until your computer starts to just really slow down. When you go ahead and try to track something, you know, you get a lot of latency, a lot of glitching. What you can do is just very simply track with no plugins. So for example, if you have a band coming in, you know you're gonna track about 10 tracks of drums, you got rhythm guitar, lead, bass, vocals, keys, and you know that's gonna take up, you know, maybe 20, 30, 40 tracks. Just don't include any plugins during the recording process. So essentially, while you are recording stuff onto your DAW, don't add any of the compression, the EQ, the verb, and save some of that for the mixing process. So another thing you can do to help the performance of your computer is defragment your hard drive. So I'm running Windows, so I come down here, gonna come over to computer. Here are my drives. So if I go ahead and right click on one of the drives and go to properties, I get this. Now, if I come up to tools right here, this is defragmentation. So I can defrag now. And as you can see, all my drives are defragged is the word. But what you can go ahead and do is you can first analyze the disk or the drive and see if it even needs to be defragmented. Now I'm running Windows 7 and it obviously, you can see, has a scheduled defragmentation that I go ahead and it does it on its own. But if you don't have this enabled, make sure you go ahead and defragment your hard drive. And what this does is sometimes when Cakewalk is, you know, you're recording files, it just kind of starts putting the audio files not back to back right next to each other. It starts spreading them out in the drive. And now the computer has to work a little harder in the hard drive to find those files to be able to play them for you. So if you defragment your hard drive, you should notice a little bit of increase in your computer's performance, because now your computer isn't searching for all these random files for a particular project. So another thing you can do is replace your hard drives. So over the last few years, I've been transitioning from the traditional spinning disk drives into solid state drives. Now, unfortunately, they do cost more money than the traditional drive, but what you get out of them is performance. The read and write speeds, meaning how quickly the information can get onto the drive and then how quickly it can come back off and get processed by the computer, is much quicker with a solid state drive. So if you have a little bit of an older computer that might be still running those traditional drives, you might want to check out some of the great deals that they have on solid state drives, that you can replace it in your computer and replace that traditional drive with a solid state drive. Now, another thing I started doing about 10 years ago was running 2 different drives. So one drive was for the system drive, meaning this is where Windows was on, all my programs were all stored on this one drive. The other drive is where I stored all the projects, the audio files, the samples. And what this helps to do is the one drive, because it actually is constantly being pulled information because it's the system drive, I always made that drive. That was my fastest, best drive. Now the other drive, the one with all the project files, the audio samples, the audio on it, that one was obviously a bigger drive. It just had more storage. So you definitely want to have that audio drive be a larger capacity drive than the system drive. So another thing you can do is change the buffer size or the latency. By increasing the buffer size, essentially the computer has a little bit longer to process the audio, which does help cut down on the CPU needed to process your project. So if you come up here to edit, we go to preferences, and then come over here to drivers and settings. And you can see down here, mixing latency. If you click on this ISO panel, that's what I'm running with my SSL converters, you can actually go ahead and change this buffer size. So the faster you have the buffer size, the quicker, the more power your computer needs to be able to process all the plugins and the audio. But if you slow it down, as you can see, it gets to safe. Now it's going to have a little bit of latency. So if you're recording, you might notice a little bit of delay in the recording, which can be kind of annoying to deal with, but sometimes you got to do what you got to do to make sure that the recording happens. You can always line up the audio files later on, or just keep it on fast while you're recording, and during the mixing phase, you can go ahead and lower this so that you just have more processing power so your computer can process all these audio files and plugins that you're going to be running. So one of the very last things you can do is just very simply close out anything that is running in the background of your computer. So if you come down to the Windows bar at the bottom here and you go ahead and show hidden icons, these are all the things that are actually running in the background. I can't see them, but we got the Intel graphics, my mouse, keybot, all these different things. This adds up to the processing power, the CPU power that your computer needs to process your project. So if there's anything you can close, maybe have the internet open or whatever it is, but make sure you close out all those things to just make sure that you're leaving your entire computer to just use all of its CPU power to process your project. Really quickly, let's just go over the 3 major components in a computer. If you better understand how a computer works, maybe it'll help you make some better decisions on how to reduce the overall CPU load that your computer needs to run your audio project. So there's 3 main things in a computer without getting overcomplicated. There's the CPU, the RAM or memory, and then last is the storage drive, or also known as a hard drive. So I'm sure, as we all know, the CPU is what processes, all of our plugins and the audio files and all the things that we've done in our audio project. Now, what is a little bit confusing is some people think that the memory is also the same thing as the storage. So you store all your audio projects, your audio files, all your stuff that needs a storage place on your hard drive, whether it be a traditional spinning hard drive or a solid state drive. That's where everything gets stored. Now the RAM or the memory is what the CPU needs. When the CPU is sent too much information, it quickly holds it in the RAM, and then when the CPU has processed all the information, and then pulls the rest of the information from the RAM back to the CPU. So why does this matter? It matters because if you have a better understanding how a computer works, you might be able to make some better decisions when it comes to freeing up some space on your computer for the CPU. So with that being said, deleting files on your hard drive and deleting projects is not going to give you any more CPU power. So guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you can use this information to free up that CPU power that is just so critical to have when you're running these big audio projects that are just really demanding on your computer. All right, guys, so I hope this helped. Let me know if there's any additional things that you guys do to free up CPU power on your computer. So if you guys like this video, consider subscribing and hit that like button. Follow us on Instagram for daily posts. You can find the beats that I make right here at the studio on our SoundCloud page. True Sound Studios also mixes and masters your tracks. So once again, guys, thanks for watching this video. I'm Wiesna, we're at True Sound Studios, and True Sound Studios is in your ears.